You have your thing?
I got my thing.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Betty. The interesting thing is that I know from what I've read that a moderator is not supposed to be involved, is kind of like an impartial person who kind of lays down the rules or introduces people. However, I can't help but be, okay, I'm very emotional. I'm a very emotional person. I can't help but be moved by what I've heard today. And I'm going to make this small. I learned about Dr. McAllister because I was working on a theater project and doing research here in Mississippi, and then I learned about this person. I said, who is that person? So I eventually met Betty, and we had a 10-minute conversation, never saw her again for like 4 years, and emailed her, and I said, hello, we are ready to have a conversation because we're doing this project and I am interested in what you have to tell me. So that's why I'm here, because of heart, because that's where it is. That's where I live. Okay, so I'm going to say it's a beautiful morning, everyone. And first of all, I would like to begin with a quote. Let me clear my throat. I will begin with this quote. In 1929, Mabel Carney, a professor at Columbia University Teachers College, said this: "The real history of the study of American Negro education on the advanced level began with Jane McAllister's pioneering dissertation on the training of Negro teachers in Louisiana." Now, before we get into the heart, and it is the heart of the program, I would like to first give a very, very warm welcome to our in-person guests and to our online audience. We are truly grateful for your presence at this important gathering, and we're excited to embark on this journey together. Thank you for showing up. Yeah, thank you for showing up. And in my experience as a theater person, with any live presentation, there are unexpected twists and turns, and life happens, and there are people who may be delayed, and extraordinary people who are trying to get to us right now to take part in this burgeoning community. So planes are delayed, plans have shifted, people are trying to, get here. So it's an important celebration. This is an important gathering. It's an important symposium. And I hope that you will embrace the possibility that things might shift and, schedules change and blah, 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 blah. Last bit, yeah. Oh, yes, sorry. This is the last bit of business that I'll say. Some of you have taken index cards to write down questions for our panelists, and I just wanted to add that if you have a question for a specific panelist, please put their name on the card, and we'll collect your cards at the end of the last keynote address. So lastly, for detailed biographical information about our panelists, please refer to your printed programs. So thank you for your patience, and I'm sorry about my voice. I don't know what's going on. So now we get to the heart of the program. Welcome. Welcome to Shaping the Cultural Environment, a Window on the World Symposium. And I'm going to reflect on a window on the world. Yes, just imagine in the mid-20th century, Black students had access to, interaction with national and global leaders in education, politics, you name it. Windows on the world. Dr. McAllister's programming, her progressive programming, made Jackson State a showcase. Now, our goal over the course of these 2 days is to honor the life and intellectual legacy of a true I think you said it, Mayor Flags, trailblazer, a true trailblazer with an indomitable spirit, with an unwavering commitment. Ah, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. With an unwavering commitment to the life of the mind. Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister. Now, her name alone is deserving of a moment, I think, a pause, a little air around it, allowing it to resonate and stand on its own. That's an important name to me now. And we're very excited to welcome a very impressive lineup of distinguished speakers, both today and tomorrow, each bringing their own unique perspectives and expertise to our symposium. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dr. Ralph Eubanks, who is a visiting professor and writer in residence at the University of Mississippi, and author of A Place Like Mississippi, A Journey Through a Real and Imagined Literary Landscape. Dr. Eubanks will be sharing his insights on unveiling the intellectual odyssey of Dr. Jane McAllister. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Eubanks.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to get to talk about Dr. Jane and to actually begin to think about the ways that my life has really intersected with hers. Now, everyone in this room knows that Mississippi occupies a distinct and dramatic place in the history of the United States. No state in the South was more resistant to the struggle for Black equality. No place was also more violent. As historian David Oshinsky writes, the codes of honor and vengeance, the effects of poverty, ignorance, and isolation had all left their bloody mark. Mississippians earned less, killed more, and died younger than other Americans. Likewise, Mississippi set the trend in racial oppression. Its 1890 Constitution became a model for Southern state constitutions for the way it disenfranchised its Black citizens. Plus, Mississippi had a high rate of lynchings, recording 539 between the end of Reconstruction and the early 1960s. Mississippi was the most racially restrictive state in the South, though one with relatively few Jim Crow laws. They weren't needed. Custom prevailed in ways that laws could not. That was the world that Jane McAllister was born into in 1899. As she often reminded people, she was born in the 19th century, not the 20th. And it is this 19th century world into which she was born that makes her accomplishment of being the first Black woman to earn a PhD in education from Teachers College at Columbia University so remarkable. As a Black person educated in Mississippi, beginning in segregated schools in a small rural community, Mount Olive, Mississippi, about 75 miles from here, I recognize how much the work of Dr. McAllister and her study of the needs of rural Black teachers affected my life. And strangely enough, I have followed some of Dr. McAllister's path, attending graduate school at the University of Michigan and living not that far from where she lived in Ann Arbor, and living in a neighborhood in Washington, D.C., not that far from what was the campus of Miners Teachers College, where she once taught. But the connection gets even stronger. Many of my teachers in Mount Olive were Jackson College graduates. and my first grade teacher, Geraldine Parker, took Dr. McAllister's psychology class. Geraldine Parker is 94 years old today and only remembers Dr. McAllister as a very tough teacher. But she also remembers how students talked about how she rode a Trailways bus to Jackson from Vicksburg every day to teach them and returned to Vicksburg every evening. She's never forgotten Dr. McAllister's dedicatedly printed letters of the alphabet. And if I close my eyes right now, I can still see the tiny arrows straddling the edge. Jane McAllister understood the power of writing and words, penning numerous academic articles and conducting studies to help disadvantaged students and to accessible from a well-trained teacher who could connect with the imagination of a child. And Jane McAllister made it her responsibility to make sure that the students who studied with her had a clear sense of purpose as a teacher and felt the same sense of responsibility to quality teaching that she did. But in the 1960s, in Mississippi, the civil rights movement was beginning to change things. And Dr. McAllister understood that she had a responsibility to confront those changes. In 1965, she published an article for the Journal of Educational Leadership titled Effective Climate and the Disadvantage. In that article, she wrote, "What more appropriate time and what more appropriate place to examine an effective climate of learning and teaching than between 1961 and 1964 in Mississippi?" Dr. McAllister was telling the story of an educational enrichment program that had taken place at Jackson State during those years for disadvantaged students from around the state in a climate of, quote, violence, discontent, anger, bitterness, during a hot summer of sit-ins and other demonstrations for civil rights in a region which often seems quite far away in beliefs and practices from the rest of the United States. As she wrote, what more appropriate time and place to show the power and glory of eternal ideas, to share a flowering of spirit, which produced new courage, calmness, tranquility, and balance. This was the appropriate time to be doing this work. But reading Dr. McAllister's words made me realize that she was not just an educator. She was an activist. Education was her form of activism. And a year after Dr. McAllister's paper was published, in 1965, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, published a scathing report of the ineffectiveness of freedom of choice integration plans that were being used as a ruse to comply with federal integration mandates, stating many of the so-called freedom of choice plans, although seemingly workable on paper, are in fact a farce. They offered no meaningful choice and certainly no freedom of choice. How can a choice be free when often it is a choice between a student's and parents losing their jobs or transferring their child to a white school? When Alexander v. Holmes forced Mississippi schools to integrate in January 1970, the farce of freedom of choice ended. Alexander v. Holmes fulfilled the Brown decision, although it did not work everywhere. The Holmes decision not only brought about change to Mississippi's education landscape, but to Mississippi's social structure as well. I want to return to Mississippi post-integration, but first I want to go back to the days of what was called separate but equal. As someone with lived experience of those years of separate but equal, the lesson was really quite simple. Integrationists and segregationists stood on separate sides of a political and intellectual chasm. For people of my generation, we know that separate but equal was being used by Southern spokespersons, editors of regional newspapers, for example, and was mostly used for Northern audiences. It was not, however, the language of the most fanatical racist. It seldom shows up in the speeches of James Vardaman, Ross Barnett, or George Wallace. The more extreme races, like Vardaman, preferred exclusion, not separate facilities for blacks, but no facilities at all. And at their core, Barnett and Wallace felt the same way. But there was a difference between integration and desegregation. We had desegregation in Mississippi, as we no longer had a dual education system. But integration proved difficult, since in an integrated system, all parties must be treated equally. And the forces of massive resistance were so strong that true integration in Mississippi proved to be a challenge. In the American South, our dual system of education was inherently unequal. There was nothing equal about the separate school systems in Mississippi and across the South. There were inequities all throughout the system. Instead of resolving those inequities, we created new manifestations of those inequities. Dr. McAllister's work was all about resolving these. But after integration, these inequities took a different shape, since many were determined even after integration, to perpetuate a system rooted in exclusion. Although I was part of the target demographic of Dr. McAllister's work, like Dr. McAllister, I was also part of a small black middle class. Mississippi's black middle class had a measure of privilege because we had books at home and educated parents. When I think of Dr. McAllister's legacy, what I realize that we can all learn from it is how she used the privilege she had to help shape a better life for the students whose lives she touched, regardless of their social status. When the Supreme Court's decision in the Alexander v. Holmes County Board of Education case ordered integration in schools in Mississippi, the educational landscape changed, but not entirely in ways for the better, and not in the ways Jane McAllister had hoped for Mississippi's black students. Separate but equal was never going to work, since by its very nature, inequity was built into the system. Instead, what happened was disinvestment in public education in many Mississippi communities. In the aftermath of integration, the children of middle-class black families like my own were equipped in ways to survive integration. We had parents who had educations and made sure that we continued that pattern. But that was harder for first-generation black graduates. And the place where I believe that was the hardest was in the Mississippi Delta. In the Delta, whites flocked to private academies, instant schools that were constructed with cheap cinder blocks and corrugated siding. Outside the town of Charleston, you can see the now closed Strider Academy, named for the Tallahatchie County Sheriff during the murder of Emmett Till. The doors of the school remain open, and you can walk through the halls. I have walked through them. And you can see the detritus of a school created to maintain segregation. But it also helped perpetuate ignorance about the past and the present, something Jane McAllister would have found disdainful. From 1880 through the 1960s, public schools for black children in the Mississippi Delta were so poorly funded that they set up their students for a life of second-class citizenship and servitude. During Mississippi's Summer Project in 1964, otherwise known as Freedom Summer, the idea of a summer school that would provide an alternative curriculum sprang up in the Delta and all across Mississippi. Charlie Cobb of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee proposed the idea of establishing freedom schools that would enhance the education of young black Mississippians and encourage them to, quote, articulate their own desires, demands, and questions, and to find alternatively and ultimately new directions for action. At the time, Mississippi's public schools had what historian William Sturkey describes as a policy of deliberate censorship that withheld information about the civil rights movement and limited discussions of citizenship rights and black history. Much like the work of Jane McAllister, the Freedom Schools sought to provide educational enrichment that would empower young black Mississippians to reach their full intellectual potential. This past spring, as part of some of my reporting from my forthcoming book on the Mississippi Delta, I assembled a group of students from the Sunflower County Freedom Project to discern what they knew about the history of school integration in Mississippi, as well as the ways the private academy system created a new version of separate schools, none of them equal in any way. The Freedom Project started as a summer program, but today it operates year-round and offers middle and high school students intensive academic enrichment, mentoring, educational travel, physical education, and art classes. In the summers, 10th through 12th graders are offered college courses. For those who go to college, the Freedom Project also provides mentorship support during the undergraduate years, for all 4 undergraduate years. And it follows the tradition of the 1960s freedom schools by seeking to supplement the education they receive in public schools and encouraging intellectual curiosity. And its work is done in the spirit of Jane McAllister's desire to be an activist for education. The current executive director, LaToisha Brown, who was once a Freedom Project student, allowed me to talk with a group of 4 students who are intensely interested in history. In high school, LaToisha had also begun to wonder why she had little interaction with her white peers in her hometown of Indianola. She knew that some of the current Freedom Project students might also be wondering the same thing. I began our discussion with a reading of the poem Justice by Langston Hughes, accompanied by an image of a blindfolded Lady Justice. The poem reads, that justice is a blind goddess, is a thing to which we black are wise. Her bandage hides 2 festering sores that once, perhaps, were eyes. I use that poem to begin a discussion of the history of school integration, pointing out that the injustices of the education system in the Delta are hidden by bandages that were put on more than 50 years ago. And those bandages keep us from seeing those inequities. Of course, we began our discussion with Brown, which they all knew ended separate but equal. Next, I presented them with a timeline of school integration in the Delta, discussed the role massive resistance played in delaying the with all deliberate speed intent of Brown, and finally, the Alexander v. Holmes case that ordered integration and should have ended massive resistance. One young, perceptive 7th grader spoke up and said, "Brown left room for loopholes. Alexander V. Holmes addressed the loopholes." After this discussion of the history, I posed this question: is it legal to have a school where only students of one race can attend? There was silence. And then I assured them that I was not asking them a trick question. Then one student spoke up and said, "No, it's not legal. But some schools you have to pay for. And those schools were made just for white people." When I asked them if they knew why those schools you have to pay for started, it was clear that they did not connect the history we had just discussed with the existence of those academies. They had never even heard the term segregation academy. The segregation that was a daily part of their lives was presented to them as if it was normal, as simple as white people pay to go to school and black people don't. Just as there were once a number of rules and restrictions that governed the system of Jim Crow, guidelines sociologist Hortense Powdermaker referred to as the little things that prick, this new form of segregation seemed to also have set its own rules. As one student noted, when black students go to all white schools, there are a different set of expectations. Although I could not get her to come up with a difference in the expectations, what the group decided was that in integrated schools, they would be seen as inferior, which to them meant there would be no room for them to make mistakes. Judging from the expressions on their faces that day, they were ashamed that they didn't understand the connection between segregated Delta schools and the existence of the academies. Sometimes they characterized that as an open secret. They had all learned about the Brown decision, but no one knew that the all-white private schools were a way to subvert the Brown decision and marked the next phase in massive resistance. But there was one other myth that they wondered about. Were the white academies better schools? I assured them that they were not. I said, yes, the buildings might be in a better state of repair, but there was little else that differed except that the academies were majority white. Instead of pushing more questions at them, I asked them to write down why they thought they had not learned any of this history in school. And here's a few of what they said. One student said, they did not want us to know what happened. They thought it would upset us. They kept us blinded like Lady Justice. The other said, it was too uncomfortable to talk about it. They limited our knowledge of this history, kept us from learning what actually happened when schools integrated. Another said they did not tell us because they wanted to maintain the status quo. The best way to do that was to keep us ignorant and uninformed. And then there was this longer response. The student said, it's crazy how this bad stuff has been happening under our noses. To be honest, I feel a bit more informed and plan to start breaking the cycle of ignorance. I will probably start looking at a lot of things more closely. What I've learned today has set me on a new path on the journey of righteousness. Finally, I read to them the line from the Alexander v. Holmes case that the freedom of choice system placed a cruel and intolerable burden on black families. Next, I ask, what is the burden we are all carrying today? Do we still have an intolerable burden? Their response to this question was much faster. One student said, The intolerable burden is that we still have segregation. No one ever made an effort to do anything about it. Another commented that the cruel and intolerable burden has become a way of life. But we can't do anything about it. The intolerable burden is driven by fear, and we are afraid that things might get worse. If we acknowledge this burden, the student said, it might actually lead to less funding than we have for our schools now. We are afraid of losing the education funding we already have. It is the fear of losing what we have that drives this. Then it occurred to me that what keeps this whole system intact is fear mixed with shame. The shame also drives the fear. There is fear of having even less school funding, worse buildings, and fewer resources. At the end of this, the students all thanked me for coming, and I thanked them for their honesty. And leaving them that day in Sunflower, as I drove north on Highway 49, I drove past North Sunflower Academy, a school founded in 1966 after the children of Matthew and May Bertha Carter integrated schools in Drew, Mississippi. The Carter family was a plaintiff in the Alexander v. Holmes case. Then I took a fleeting glance at the boarded-up, formerly all-black school in Drew, a building that was once a Rosenwald school. The conversation that day and seeing and thinking about these symbols of educational inequality and the Rosenwald School built to achieve some equity in education made me realize that racial justice cannot be achieved in the Delta without real integration. Not desegregation, but integration, where the entire community is invested in the school system. Without integration, young black children in the Delta will continue to see themselves as inferior. And whites in the academies will continue to see themselves as superior. The cycle will never end. The festering sores on the eyes of the blindfolded goddess of justice will never heal, and we will continue to carry a cruel and intolerable burden. As I look back on this conversation with these students in the Mississippi Delta, I have to ask myself the question, given where we are in the Delta, as well as in my own hometown of Mount Olive, where there has been a resegregation of schools accompanied by decreased resources. What would Jane McAllister do? She would definitely not look at the situation and throw up her hands, which seems to be what the state of Mississippi has done. As McAllister once said, living without bitterness is not easy, but education, not fighting, is the only way out of poverty, bias, and ignorance. Projects like the Sunflower County Freedom Project are seeking to live out Dr. McAllister's vision of using education as a way out of poverty, bias, and ignorance. But we need more programs like them. We simply do not have enough of them. And I believe that we must develop innovative ways to enrich the education of young people in Mississippi, who in many towns are just as starved for educational enrichment as they were during the era of segregation during which Dr. McAllister worked. In an interview that David Ray Morris did with Dr. McAllister, it's really kind of breathtaking to me that she was not boastful about what she had accomplished. But there was one thing that she said that I have not been able to forget, that even when I watched her say these words, it really brought tears to my eyes. When confronted with the idea that she had a legacy, she replied by saying, I just want to vanish. Those of us gathered here today must make sure that Dr. McAllister's legacy and what she worked to achieve does not vanish. Because if the ideals she upheld vanish, the cruel and intolerable burden that exists on the educational landscape of Mississippi will continue. And we all cannot afford to allow that to happen. Thank you all very much.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, thank you. That was, wow. Inspiring and thought-provoking, and yeah, thank you. That actually, a lot of that history I did not know, so thank you. We are going to take a 15-minute break. So I'm not wearing a watch, but I do have my iPad, so that means we'll be back somewhere around 11:45, and we'll begin session 2. Thank you.
Hey, Phil. See you. I didn't want to say to them, but thank you for being here. I'm Brady Thompson. Ms. Candell, is that right? Yeah. Okay, so good to meet you. Good to have you from New York City.
Yes, I am.
You are now.
And you know what? My neighborhood in New York, in Queens, which was like jazz area. It's Count Basie's house. Okay? That is so cool. Milton's, my mom and I followed Milton everywhere he played. Everywhere he played. And I didn't know he was from I didn't know that. I know. And Milton was like this photographer.
Well, good to have you here. I've got to run to another appointment, but I'm glad to hoping to catch later today.
This is yours.
Yeah, and do I need to move this?
You're fine. It's still right here. It's fine.
Okay, that's good. This is probably your pen.
It's,
Can I leave this here? So that
yeah,
I
that's
can-
fine.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
So is this an HDMI?
It's
HDMI
a
cord?
USB-C, yeah.
Okay, here's the
Yeah, this one's actually
HDMI,
mine.
huh? Okay, great. And is it already? It's already attached to everything.
Yeah, you just need to plug it in.
And so does How are you? You as well.
Oh my goodness, you got here.
Really crazy. Yes. So glad to be here. Glad to be here. Thank you.
So when you plug it up, you have this power on. This one here is the controller, basically.
And so I'm not so sure who's going first on this session, but so this is USB-C.
Yes, this is the USB-C. This is the HDMI.
Okay.
If you plug this into the HDMI and then hit the HDMI button, whatever's
back to
plugged
that.
into the HDMI is what's going to be projecting
Okay.
up there.
Great.
And it just takes a second for it to start actually projecting up
Okay.
there.
So they could even be plugged in together
Yes.
at the same time,
Yes.
and you just swap back and forth.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I can also use this one because I have both, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I won't take his though. Okay. Oh, but mine is. You know what? I'm also operating through Google Drive, so I need the internet. So let me make sure that I'm right. So, is it going to be able to play? But I'm wondering, yes, I see it. Okay, so it's not, I want to make sure that, because it is it's not a PowerPoint, it's a, so do you know what the?
Hinds Public.
Okay, that's want to be just. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Put that back on there. Okay. So, it's automatic. It's automatic. The Wi-Fi should definitely.
Yeah, it doesn't have a password or anything on it, so I just hit next.
Just want to make sure. Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Like I said, whoever's going first, just hit the one that they're attached to, USB-C, HDMI.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. And should you turn the mic back on? Excuse me.
I never see you anymore. Still at home. I mean, how are we gonna get it on that? Only the last. All right, so well, basically, well, the research is great stars. This was on that. Yes. I will.
Yes, I heard.
All this apple. What are you doing? Hey.
I have a question. I've got a clip from my film I'm going to show tomorrow. Are you guys in charge of the AV?
Oh no. But if you, what kind of device do you have?
Well, I've got it on a jump drive. I've got it on the computer, so I can do it. However,
It has a C port and an HDMI.
okay, I can probably just I can do an HDMI and I can do that.
So
you just plug that into my computer and then it'll go up.
yes, sir.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
I mean, part of me does. I'm going to introduce, oh, you got all your stuff up in here.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Hello, you know what I have to do? I actually have to do a little introduction. This is my mommy and my daddy.
Oh, they're cute. They look nice.
They are nice.
So you're all set. All set.
Okay. So we're going to get started in about a minute. Although I think there were some people outside.
Excuse me.
So I'm sorry. I'm all. Oh, okay.
Who's first?
I'm just going to introduce you first.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay?
That's totally fine.
And you got all that stuff.
Yeah, it's all taken care of. But I'm going to actually keep it on USB-C because I'm going to read some stuff first that I don't want to show.
Okay.
And then I'll switch it back over.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering. Oh, Bill, I feel horrible. No, it's all right. No, I'm totally insecure. Do you know that?
Well, you're an actress.
Well, I am, but I'm not. I'm like a person here, but it's scarier to be a person.
Well, you know, when I was at ADH, we gave a big grant to Queen's University to their.
Oh, Queens College?
Yes.
That's where I went.
to help renovate the collections of the Louis Armstrong material.
Oh yes, I grew up there. My goodness.
I went up for that, and I couldn't believe it. In the audience were all of my heroes, including Milt Hinton. I mean, there were all these jazz musicians lived in Queens because they had,
Lena Horne, Ella Fitzgerald,
because they had nice middle-class homes.
James Brown.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that's like amazing. I mean, so yeah, I love the connections. I mean, yes,
My sister's a fan of yours. She's an actress.
What's your who? Yes.
She lives. They wanted to live in Queens, and they couldn't find a place they could afford.
Oh.
So Martha Ferris, her husband is Cos Cosmeyer, who's a sorting writer.
Okay, these are. I'm just live theater. That's me. I don't know.
They know who you are.
Okay.
But they now live in Garrison, New York.
Oh, nice.
And you all need to get together.
Okay.
Because
let's make that
he's
happen.
a playwright, screenwriter, and she's an actress and artist.
Oh, okay. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you. Wow, I have to get. Welcome to session 2. Which is Nurturing the Life of the Mind, Pedagogical Approaches in Black Education. We were supposed to, Dr. Felton Moss was supposed to speak today. However, he was detained because of conflict. Unexpected conflict. However, we do have with us Dr. Joy A. Spencer, who is the Dean of the School of Education at the University of California, Riverside. She is the author of Anti-Black Racism at School, Creating Affirming Educational Spaces for African American Students, published by Teachers College Press. Her work centers on educational equity in higher and K-2 education and investigates the mathematics learning opportunities of African American and other minoritized youth. Our other presenter is Ms. Kenitra Tucker, an American history teacher and 2023 Teacher of the Year, Vicksburg High School. Ms. Tucker will demonstrate a hands-on project-based learning activity that introduces Dr. McAllister to her students. So let us welcome first Dr. Joy Spencer. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. All right. I think it's still morning. All right, all right. So I'm coming from the great state of California, where it is still 8:50 a.m. So I'm asking for a little mercy for those of us who are up all night. And but it's a true pleasure to be here. I'm going to read a little bit, and then I'm going to actually show a presentation and talk to you about some of the work that I've been engaged in California. I want to start by saying that it is an honor to be asked to present in the tradition of Dr. Jane McAllister. Well, I am not a McAllister scholar. I wouldn't claim to be. I have learned about this extraordinary individual. I am quite frankly in awe that a woman born in 1899 America was able to accomplish so much. Her family did not take much time after our enslavement as a people to get down to business, right? Yeah. Both of her parents had formal education, which is a miracle, really. As I read and have read more about Dr. McAllister, I began to see incredible parallels between her work and my own, and her life and my own life, even though I was born right in another century. Most importantly, Dr. Jane McAllister saw education as a tool for our liberation. This has been my own life's work, something that captured my imagination even as a young person. I loved to read when I was a kid. I love to write. I love those stories about the practicing of the writing. I used to love my handwriting book as a kid. I used to watch every nature program that possibly came on, every documentary. I longed to see a black naturalist on TV, but it was Jacques Cousteau instead. I think you could say that I love to learn. And I think that the mark of a true educator is that they are someone who loves to learn. They love learning. If you're thinking about your kids' teachers and you want to know, is my kid's teacher a good teacher, going to be a good teacher? Do they love to learn? That's the first thing. But there is more to our work than loving to learn. The African American education tradition commands that our knowledge not be stored up in encyclopedias or gathered to win prizes or awards. Our work is about freedom. Let me say that again. Our work is about freedom. And the black educational tradition sits the work of teaching and the work of liberating side by side. Right. For the black student, you are literally learning so that you can be free. For the teacher, you are literally teaching so that your community can be free. Right? And for the teacher educator, you are teaching your teachers how to teach so that they can help our community be free. Can we say an amen to that? Amen. There is a long legacy of teacher liberators in the black community. Those who understood the connection between our knowledge and our liberation. So today, when I do my work as a dean of the School of Education at the University of California, where I serve as the first woman dean, the first black dean, the first minority dean. When I do that work, I understand that I am part of a much, much larger legacy. So it is a particular honor to be here to step into that legacy of Dr. McAllister, and to just be invited to come here is beyond what I could ever imagine. With that, I'm going to start my presentation, and I apologize. Us educators, we always present. It's always about it's a little bit theatrical all the time for us. Okay, I heard we had our moderator is a performing artist. I love that, right? Because to teach well, you must, right? You must. So I want to call this talk Jane McAllister, STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and the tradition of overcoming. I love this statement that McAllister makes, that she walked in and was born into the tradition of overcoming. If our young people could hold this in their hearts, that I'm not just at school to learn science, I'm not just at school to get an A, I'm here to overcome on behalf of our people. That's the goal.
That's it.
That's the goal.
That's it.
And when you hold that in your heart, then it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter if the teacher likes you or doesn't like you. It doesn't matter, because you came for a different purpose and you know why you're there. I want to start just a little bit sharing about a book that I was so blessed to write. And I'm thankful it was published by Teachers College Press, right? Teachers College is where McAllister graduated, got her PhD. Wow. And to be asked in the midst of, my colleague and I wrote this book as the national capital was being overtaken by vandals and scoundrels. We literally were writing it that day. We were starting the writing of this book on that day. And this book is called Anti-Blackness at School, and the goal of this book is to help people see that anti-blackness re-represents itself every new decade. It doesn't look the same way it looked when I was in school in the 80s. It doesn't look the same way it looked when McAllister was in school, but the outcome And the goal is still the same, to enforce a second-class citizenship so that you cannot be free, so that we will not be free. And so the goal of this book, first of all, is to help teachers, everyday teachers, understand how they can interrupt the status quo in small ways, right? Because we've moved from a place where you go to school and maybe you see a noose on the table. We don't see that anymore. And in California, we definitely don't see that. But anti-racism exists, anti-blackness exists in California. In our schools, it's all throughout our schools. Yet it's invisible, yet it's real. So there is our book introduces it starts off by introducing a long and rich educational heritage in the African American community. So we start out by laying out who our academic stars are, who are our education liberator stars. Because if people can understand that education and liberation have always been a force within the Black community, they will teach our children differently. And so we introduce immediately the reader to Woodson. And we introduce the reader to, I wish we had known about McAllister, because we would have introduced the reader to McAllister. And I promise, if we get a chance to do part 2, we'll introduce the reader to McAllister. Right? And we do that, we start this teacher book because we believe that you cannot teach children whose communities you do not respect. You cannot teach a child well if you don't believe that that community has anything to respect. And so we begin teaching history. That's how we start off this teacher education book, with history, because history is the root, it's the foundation. Black people have always been teaching and learning, always been uplifting, often in hidden and fugitive ways. There are these amazing books that if you haven't read them, but I'm in a group of scholars, so I know you have. But in case you have not, Their Highest Potential by Vanessa Siddell Walker, I think, is just foundational, where she talks about the power of Black schooling and going to schools that were designed to oppress us, but because they were all Black spaces, they turned into transformative spots, right? And she's writing from North Carolina. Schoolhouse Activist, right? A powerful book about, again, the teacher liberator, and it documents these teacher liberators. The Education of Blacks in the South, if you haven't read it, you have to read it. It is foundational reading for us educators to understand the work and the tool and the craftiness of educational inequity from its historical roots. And finally, newest book, Fugitive Pedagogy, where Jarvis takes on the work of Carter G. Woodson, and again talks about how education has always been a fugitive act in our community, right? You're teaching the ABCs, but underneath, you're teaching something so much more powerful. As you're reading the morning attendance, you're saying, Mr. So-and-so, are you here? Yes, and the teacher doesn't just say, Joy, I'm actually called Miss Spencer, right? The Black teacher calls you Miss Spencer, and you sit up a little more straight. Miss Spencer, I met your mother this afternoon. So you know already that the teacher is connected to your mother and the father and the grandma. So even calling attendance was an act of liberation. We introduce people in our book to Frederick Douglass. When Douglass was an enslaved young man, there's a moment when he is learning how to read. We all know this, right? His mistress, as he calls her, his master's wife, is teaching him how to read. But somehow the master walks in the room during this act. And the master, who actually is Douglass's dad, says to his wife, how dare you teach him how to read? If you teach N to read, you will forever make him unfit to be a slave. And then Douglass says at that moment, he said, it was at that moment, this is the epiphany moment, that I understood how it worked. That the power to keep me oppressed, the power to keep me, right, tilling the field, was in the power of that word. And so I had to learn to read. I had to learn I had to, because I refused to be oppressed another day. And so then Frederick, even in the midst of the ultimate oppression, right? He was sent to the slave breakers. Frederick was sent down south. He was everything because he was in Maryland, but he got sent to the slave breaker. In the midst of all that, now how did this man learn to read? Because it wasn't about other people, it was about in him. He knew, I must be free. And so if we can give our young people this spirit of, you must be free, then they can accomplish anything. So it's at this moment that Douglass decides, I will read, I will learn. When Douglass finally extricated himself from slavery, which he did himself, right? He was a fugitive. People forget that Douglass lived the rest of his life as a fugitive. When people saw Douglass and heard Douglass speak, they would tell people, there's no way this man was a slave. He's lying to you all. This is not the person that was enslaved. And they said that because his elocution was so on point. He was so articulate. He was so masterful with the American English language that they could not believe that this is the same man that just 4 years earlier had been oppressed and sowing and tilling in the fields. But he was. And so we set this man up, Frederick Douglass, as an icon for us to think about. And I think McAllister is the same. Right? Here's a woman, right, who's dealing with a double level of oppression, who couldn't vote, right? Who couldn't legally read in most places in the country, who could not legally, I didn't say could not legally go to school, I said could not legally read. That's a different level. And so I want to talk to you about what it means let's fast forward. What does it mean today to do freedom education work? What does it mean to be an education liberator? To do the things that our ancestors were doing, first of all, you have to understand that you have to use your resources in ways that are clever, where you're not always telling people out loud what you're doing. Like I said, you're just calling roll. You're just calling attendance. But in calling that attendance, what else are you calling? What else are you doing? So I want to talk a little bit about some of our initiatives as a school of education. Just to give a little bit of context, the University of California is one of the largest public school systems in the nation. Next to the Library of Congress, the University of California holds the largest library of literature and readings. It has the largest holding next to the Library of Congress. So just to give you a sense of the University of California. And so enters into a historical space that is largely wealthy white. When you think about UCLA and when you think about Berkeley, these are schools that service the wealthy and service the privileged in the state of California. And then you enter into a school, University of California, Riverside, which sits to the east and sits to the south. Sound familiar? Right? And so this school, by nature, right, is servicing the underserved in the state of California. It's servicing those who are forgotten. It's servicing the prison communities. It's servicing those who are the stepchildren. But I feel like there's something powerful that can happen in places like Nazareth, right? So let me talk to you a little bit about some of the initiatives. I've been here a year and a half, and these are some of the initiatives that we've been engaged in, because my goal is to take this School of Education and to sort of retool it as a community source, as a place of liberation. So we have a Fierce and BSEP Scholars, where we're educating undergraduates to learn how to teach and educate with fierceness in that community. So as undergraduates, if you decide to teach, when you leave, then there's scholarshiping money that you can receive through this programming. UCR Lifted. We are the only program in the country that is providing a bachelor's degree in education in a prison system. And I'm so thankful. I mean, this is amazing for me. And this has happened under my watch. That's so profound for me, because when you provide a degree in education, that means that somebody's going to read about Carter G. Woodson in prison, which is very different than getting a physics degree. Right? Getting an education degree is a liberatory degree. So we are offering a degree, and if you look at the top photo, this is our first class of who have been accepted. The smiles on their faces as we walked in, they actually, when they got their welcome packets, they got these badges. This says, I am UC Riverside. And the pride. And our faculty drive to the prison because they can't do what we're doing here. They drive to the prison. They take a lower salary than they normally would to teach a course on our campus to go and teach in the prison. That's liberatory work. I believe it's liberatory work. Yeah. The Coachella Valley Teacher Preparation Program, if you look at the young women on the bottom, these 6 young women, all first in their families to be educated, all Latina, all Spanish speaking. Coachella Valley is this underserved, under-resourced space in California. We started a teacher education program there last year. And we're doubling the number that we're educating this year. It's profound and powerful that these young women, who themselves were oppressed, are now educating their community. And they will be teachers, they are now teachers and will be teaching their community. You should see the middle school initiative and the STEAM Academy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as I move on. The STEAM Academy is designed for youth of color, for Black youth, to learn science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I cannot wait to tell you more about what that program is. And I've listed some of the other initiatives that we are engaged in as a School of Education, but I wanted to bring these to you just to tell you about the work that a School of Education is capable of doing. That we shouldn't be just sitting around as academics. Our goal is to also be engaged and liberating. Briefly, I have about 8 more minutes, I think. Okay. I want to talk to you about the STEAM Academy. I started the STEAM Academy, it's been 10 years now. It's a 2-week summer academic experience providing quality STEM programming for middle and high school kids. The focus is on African American and Latinx students and even refugee kids. But a lot of our work, particularly in Riverside, has been on African Americans. So let me walk you through what we do and why it matters. First of all, we understand that in the state of California, and I think it's really all around the country, that mathematics learning is something that we call a racialized space. Okay. That depending on the pigment in your skin, the type of mathematics education you're gonna get is gonna be different. But why does that matter? Well, in California, the type of mathematics education you get determines whether or not you will get into UCLA or Berkeley or Riverside, just like with McAllister. Remember when she was trying to go to college and her school did not provide geometry and Latin. And so her father, as he walked home on his route as a postal worker, he found a white family, that actually had a geometry book and a Latin book. And he borrowed it and brought it home, and the family then trained her so that she could pass the test to get into college. So now I want you to think about an entire nation of Black youth and youth of color who don't have access to the mathematics courses necessary to get into the university. And it happens in these subtle ways. So in California, we have AP courses. You go to a predominantly Black school, you have very few. You go to a predominantly white school, there's tons of AP courses. So just by the school you get enrolled in, you can or cannot be eligible for getting into a university. So mathematics mathematics has been called, right, the new civil right. And this idea that mathematics and the type of mathematics education you have will set you up to either be the serf of society, and that's what it's called, the designated serf of society, or it's going to set you up to be someone who has access to all that you should have access to. So I want to lay out a few things really quickly. African American students are less likely to have teachers who emphasize high quality math pedagogy. They're more likely to be tested on finding a single correct answer, which suggests that the math they're getting is not high quality. They're less likely to have teachers who use computers for simulations and application. Black students are routinely exposed to low expectations in mathematics. They're subjected to messages that they're not capable. If you haven't read the work of Ebony McGee, who studies what happens in engineering classes with high-achieving black students, they tell her over and over again that they feel like they have to prove their intellectual value, that they have to come into class with a stance of, I have to prove I belong here. And so they're having to learn underneath, not only learn engineering, not only learn mathematics, but learn it with the other pressure that you are not going to be successful. Also, black youth are exposed to beliefs that they are physically superior, but intellectually inferior. So we see a preponderance of energy put into placing black kids onto football teams, basketball teams, and track teams, while those same schools can't find our kids when it's time for getting in the engineering class or MESA or all those other opportunities. So this sense that you are, again, physically superior, and we see it at Sunday, we all watch Sunday football, Thursday night football, with the physical superiority of black people, but somehow we are intellectually dwarfed, and that impacts what happens in the school. They are educated in schools with fewer high-level and more low-level math classes. This is an amazing study that literally counts the number of high-level math courses and low-level math classes offered in schools that service black kids versus schools that do not, and there are literally fewer opportunities to access these classes because they just don't exist. And they're on the losing end of what we call tracking. In other words, if there's an opportunity to take the honors class, the mid-level class, the low-level class, more often than not, black students get placed into the low track classes. So we have all this, we call this a racialized space because race determines where you sit. I want you to take a gander just for a moment. This is California, 8th grade test scores. I think it's profound. I hope you see what I see. So when we look at these test scores, this is basically the end of 8th grade, right? And so this is when our students are transitioning into high school. This is the state examination given in the state of California. So just pause for a moment. What does this mean? Now, test scores can't tell us everything, but they can tell us something. Right? They tell us a lot. So again, in the state of California, a progressive state, a state that cares, a state that this is where we are as an African American community. So what does it mean? I think it's profound. Well, I know when I work with families, we sort of dissect this. And we spend time talking about when a teacher knows that this is the status of black kids, how does that shape how they teach black youngsters? How does it shape their belief about their mathematics ability? I want to argue that this lack of success for black students must be understood, again, within systems of oppression instead of the pathologizing of black people, right? Which is what we tend to do. We tend to take test scores and say, well, they're just not working hard. They're not, they don't have enough effort. Their parents don't care. So with the STEAM Academy, we really turn this on the head. We say, how are you taking black children who we see in kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade curious, excited to learn? I mean, just so excited that you can't even keep them still. How are those children that I saw at 6, 7, and 8 years old, these kids at 8th grade? Like, what happens? Because our kids don't come to the school broken. They don't come, we didn't deliver them broken. And so if you look at some of these photos, we literally go on a journey with STEAM Academy year after year of not just exposing our kids, but really helping them to re-see themselves, right? You cannot just teach science and math. You have to actually engage in an effort of liberation, which is what we're doing. I love the picture of the mother and the son, because we're always told that the single black mother doesn't care. This woman was with us, has been with us for years, and we bring parents and families in to do engineering with us, side by side with their kids. And their kids begin to re-see their parents, right? right? They get a chance to see, oh, my father is a sanitation worker, but my father was in class doing engineering with me. My dad is bad. My uncle is, wow, my aunt does this, my aunt knows this. We teach kids, we have a large Latino Chicano community. We teach kids about their heritage. If you don't know who you are, it doesn't matter how much science and engineering and technology you know, because if you don't know who you are, it's not going to matter anyway. So we help kids to learn about themselves. And when you know who you are, then the learning of the other things becomes much easier. So we are intentional in how we interrupt inequality and inequity. So we give them access to rich learning opportunities. For STEAM Academy over the summer, I asked all my faculty, I want my students to have access to the most profound, cutting-edge science, technology, and mathematics that we have to offer as a university. Not last decade's science and technology, not even last year's, right? This summer, our students were looking at sunspots on the sun. It's profound. Like, they're having access to like cutting edge. The leading citrus scientists in the nation really came and taught our kids. And so we're exposing them to high quality learning opportunities. We're addressing structural inequity. So we're actually teaching kids about tracking. We're teaching kids about what happens to them and how to navigate so they don't end up as the designated serf. What math class should you be taking in 8th grade? We asked them. What math class? Okay, so if your teacher doesn't let you take it, let's work through some scenarios. How could you get into that course? What are things you could do? Here's what's going to happen. Here's the test score. Here's the average test scores of 8th graders. Let's have a conversation. What does that mean? Right? And so we actually help young people see the structural inequities that they're facing. We help them see that STEM is a racialized space. We know that STEM is a gatekeeper. And then we work on identity, right? Identity. How do we change? How do we move to a different place? We focus on joy because we believe that you have to learn in joy and hope in order to do well. It's foundational. We should not, education in school should not feel like a prison. We have fun, we laugh, there's music. We pay attention to the food we serve at STEAM Academy. You should be able to eat food in California. In my whole time in school, I never ate one meal in school that was a meal that represented my family's culture. Not once. They simply did not serve it. We do something different. We serve the snacks that are from our community so that when kids come into the STEAM space, they feel like they're at home. And when you're at home, you can learn anything. And so the music feels like them. The food feels like them. And we also provide pod leaders or counselors who are like them, not just look like them, but have lived experiences like them. So we're building what we call affirming educational spaces, counter storytelling, and I'm feeling like my time is leaving me. But so I'd love to tell you more about what we do, but I think what I want to leave you with more than anything is the intentionality. There are science camps all over the country. There are STEM and STEAM camps all over the country. The question is, what is the intention? Is the intention the liberation of your young people? Are they helping young people to understand the system and how it works against them so they can undo it? That's what we're asking. That's what this work is all about. Cultural competence, critical consciousness, academic success. Just to show you in my last few minutes the kind of things we do, we give them math problems that are too difficult to solve, which is fantastic. Because there's nothing like solving something that is so impossible. We sent the problem home with the cubes. If you're ever interested in knowing that cube problem, it's very difficult. We send that problem home with kids, right? And they work on it, and they work on it. And slowly but surely, as the days go, kids begin to bring me solutions. You almost got it, not quite, I almost got it. And when they get it, the smile. We sent this problem home with one kid, it took him a week. That Saturday, his mother sent us a text. Him sitting on his bedroom floor, holding that cube with the biggest smile we had ever seen. But what's the power of working on something that is difficult to do, which is the opposite of what happens when kids don't do well in math. When you don't do well in math, you get remedial, boring, tedious. We say you didn't do well in math, we're gonna make it tougher. more exciting, more engaging, and the kids rise to the occasion every time. Every time. We do engineering, we do coding, the kids build. These are all middle schoolers. Arduino, we bring in the best engineers, the best coders to teach our kids how to do this work. This summer, I want to do a lot of work with AI, obviously. That's where we are. We do culturally relevant work. We work with Adinkra symbols. We take Adinkra, which is a West African symbol system. We study the mathematics of it, and then we have kids actually develop their own, design their own Adinkra, right? What symbol represents you, right? We talk about our own culture and the ways that mathematics is already embedded in our practices. Hair braiding is so powerful, right? To bring in a braider and talk about symmetry. The first time I showed this photo in my class in STEAM Academy, there was a little girl in my room who had, her hair was cornrowed. I do not make this up. This little girl's eyes, she said, my hair is braided. It was almost as if this light bulb of my culture is mathematical. My culture is powerful. My culture engages it. It was like she had never seen, and she probably didn't because I grew up in California. She had probably never seen a black person on a slide in a classroom that was talking about something powerful, teaching them about mathematics. And so we talk about symmetry and design, and even in the barbering, the kind of design that we see. We do work on critical consciousness. We play the game of Monopoly. We call it Equity Monopoly. It's powerful. I love to play it and show you all with it, where the kids get to literally see how we have different levels of citizenship in the country. Right? Economic opportunity and oppression, and it's lived out in front of them. I don't even have to teach the economic words for it. They just, it just peels off because they realize, oh my goodness, this is what economic oppression is. And this is why we can't get out of where we are. But when you know the game, you can play the game and you can undo the game. I just want to end by saying our work is about freedom. Jane McAllister's work was about freedom. Certainly it was about pedagogy. Certainly it was about helping give more access. Certainly it was about teaching well and helping teachers, helping people get into the profession of teaching, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing. But at its very foundation, her work was about freedom. It was about the liberation of our people. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to this next session.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Kanitra Tucker. I currently teach 11th grade U.S. History at Vicksburg High School. I believe in hands-on learning experience to deepen understanding and engagement in teaching. Project-based learning is an instructional approach that empowers students to learn by engaging in real-world and personally meaningful projects. PBLs encourage students to explore driven or essential questions over an extended period. Driven or essential questions serve as the central focus of the project, guiding students' investigation and exploration. This method promotes critical thinking, collaboration, and problem-solving skills as students work on projects that often require research, creativity, and application. I have the pleasure of introducing to you my former students, Makara Johnson, Lauren Flaggs, and Gerald Bland. Today, they will be using a driven question to introduce Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister.
All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, this is our presentation on Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister. I'm Gerald Bland.
Makara Johnson.
Lauren Flagg.
All right. The jury question is the central focus of this PBL project. What are the significant contributions of Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister that have had a lasting impact on her field of expertise and society as a whole?
Background. Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister was born October 24, 1899, in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Despite the common racism of her time that limited opportunities for black individuals, her family rose above poverty and became part of the small middle-class African-American community. In early 20th century in Mississippi, her father worked as a mail carrier and her mother worked as a school teacher, which helped them avoid the financial struggles that many African Americans faced in jobs like sharecropping and domestic work.
Remarkable achievements. Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister's remarkable achievements as the first African American woman to earn her doctoral degree in education had a profound impact on the advancement of educational opportunities and representation for underrepresented communities. Her journey served as an inspirational and catalyst for change in multiple ways.
Dr. McAllister's accomplishments shattered long-standing racial and gender barriers in the field of education. By defying societal expectations and achieving such a significant milestone, she paved the way for future generations of African American women to pursue higher education and leadership roles in the field.
Dr. McAllister's achievements powerfully represented African American women in the education realm. Her presence and success in the educational sector challenged stereotypes and encouraged other underrepresented individuals to pursue their educational goals, knowing that they too could make a difference in the community.
Advocacy for equal educational opportunities. Dr. McAllister's journey sparked conversation and push for reforms in the educational system. Her accomplishments highlighted the needs for equal access to equality education for all individuals, regardless of race or gender. By advocating for inclusive educational practices, she played a significant role in creating opportunities for marginalized communities.
Community engagement. Dr. McAllister was deeply involved in community outreach and educational initiatives to uplift marginalized communities. Her work with programs that address the socioeconomic challenges faced by rural populations demonstrated her commitment to social responsibility and educational equality.
By advocating for better funding and resources for black schools, Dr. McAllister's scholarships influenced educational policy discussions regarding equality and access. Her comparison analysis of Louisiana and North Carolina educational systems underscored their need for an extensive change and investment in teacher training.
In contrast to the eugenics-based philosophies of her contemporaries, Dr. McAllister's approach emphasized nurturing and the potential for growth in all students. This progressive outlook contributed to more holistic understanding of education that values diversity and inclusivity.
Summary. In summary, Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister's contributions fundamentally transformed the landscape of education for African Americans, advocating for better training, equitable resources, and progressive educational practices. Her legacy continues to influence the field and serves as a testament to the power of perseverance and commitment to social justice in education. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Joy Spencer. Thank you, Ms. Kenitra Tucker. And thank you, I'm going to read your names, Gerald Bland, Makira Johnson, and Lauren Flagg. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to have a lunch break. So my question is, someone will tell me, I think the lunch break will end at 2. We'll meet back here at 2. Is that right? Is that correct? Oh, yes, it is correct. I see a head nod. So yes, we will meet back at 2, and we will hear from Dr. Mary Emma Graham. And then we will do a quick Q&A after that end keynote speech. So, okay, thank you. See you at 2. State, Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister was invited back for the Jane Ellen McAllister Centennial Symposium, obviously named in her honor. As many have noted, McAllister was no fan of public occasions such as this, even as she worked diligently to create them. Ellie, or Dr. Jane, one that she had to be very proud of. No longer Jackson. But I suspect it's true. Although she had begun her relationship with Jackson State as early as the 1940s, serving as a curriculum consultant at the request of Jacob Reddix, McAllister was not persuaded to join the faculty until a decade later. Following her sterling career at several major universities throughout the South, and spending the longest period at Minor Teachers College in D.C., now the University of the District of Columbia. When her father passed, her main reason for the return home to Victoria. It is, and many of you have seen it already, even if we don't get it up here today, a moment at that event, that is the 75th anniversary of Jackson State, is probably the most widely circulating photograph in African American cultural history. And it has all the poets at the time, and many of you have seen it. And I'll just indicate to you who was there, because Walker invited all her friends. Arna Bontemps, Melvin Tolson, President Jacob Reddix, Owen Dotson, Robert Hayden, Sterling Brown, Ruth Dees, who is often confused with Zora Neale Hurston, Margaret Walker, and none other than Langston Hughes. All of those people were at the event. I would argue that this was the blossoming of the kind of work that Walker would continue to engage during her JSU years. Work that culminated in the founding of a humanities-based institute in 1969, which is today the Margaret Walker Center. This has become a crucial missing piece for understanding the significance of McAllister's role as a leader and innovator at Jackson State and the space it opened up for similar ventures by other faculty like Margaret Walker. We only know one occasion for certain that the two women would work together, and that is this 1952 75th anniversary celebration. According to the archival record, the 1952 celebration became an important precedent for the kind of wide-reaching public events that both McAllister and later Walker embraced. Quoting from the introduction to the Jane Ellen McAllister papers in Sampson's library that Carlita Ballard shared with me, and I quote, "As part of the 1952 event, McAllister launched the student-sponsored Public Affairs Forum, which brought to campus notable figures as Averill Harriman, Ralph Bunch, Whitney Young, Roy Wilkins, and Chester Bowles. As a concert pianist, although identified with teacher education as a field, she was also, I believe, movement-driven. I do not use that term movement lightly and suggest a more holistic approach to the transformation of knowledge creation and production.
The evidence that McAllister never left her humanities arts background behind is confirmed by her continued immersion in teaching the classics, Latin, in which she was fluent, her love of music, having walked away from a career as a concert pianist in her early college days at Talladega. While I do not want to take my speculations too far, and I'm very good at speculating, it is not hard to argue that the two women collaborated in their shared interest in the arts and humanities, since the purpose of education in the schools, as it was understood at that time, was to increase exposure to knowledge about and experiences with the larger culture. It is clear to me that Walker learned from the model that McAllister provided. One of the first efforts at Walker's Institute, conducted just before as Ellie was retiring, was a funded summer program for teachers on the teaching of humanities with a Black focus. This, of course, was an inaugural moment in the Black Studies movement. Thus, while the work that McAllister did fields. Participation in arts and humanities fosters creativity, just as creativity can lead to innovation. These features that were implicit in her training were easily applied to a larger purpose. As a woman of her time, with middle-class values and a belief in service to others, she was trained to find a purpose. My further speculation is that McAllister could and would accept the type of attention to herself that continuing a career as a concert pianist encouraged. That is what she saw coming. So one is not culturally deprived, one is deprived by another culture. A very significant difference. Selected by the dedicated search of zealous counselors, teachers, and principals for worthy young people, McAllister believed that they were destined, could be, to be sparks to burst into eternal, self-perpetuating spiritual flames all over Mississippi. A quote. When one reads closely, we see the distinction that she makes in an intentional, quite sophisticated way. One of the key issues for McAllister is her borrowing from the language of although many students of Dr. Alexander, and I see some of you in the room, and Dr. McAllister were and are still very much alive, my desire to do more than tell a story, but to show as much as possible, was muted during the COVID shutdown. So rather than delete the photograph, I felt that I should go ahead, include it, and then figure out what to do after the fact. So hopefully if we get a second printing or a paperback edition, we can make those corrections. But I was fortunate to have wonderful photographers, Bill Ferris, Roy Lewis, the late Roland Freeman, and others who gave permission to use their photos. But this photo remained one that I was unable to fully identify until after the book was published. Thus, I am grateful that Ellie is present in the Walker biography, symbolizing the larger network of which she was part. Today's symposium is an important moment for me personally. For the first time since the release of this book in 2022, I'm able to properly identify Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister. For me, therefore, today's symposium starts a new and different journey, one that has been a long time coming. Today, Ellie's journey takes on new meaning and hopefully opens yet another door for the kind of recovery work that remains essential in the humanities. If the 1977 event was Ellie's parting moment from JSU, the 125 years since her birth and the 28 years since her death are more than enough time for us to reconnect an extraordinarily woman to the world that she helped to shape and to properly identify her as part of a larger history of those humanists who believed in every person's potential to become everything that they are capable of. Scientific racism had no place in Ellie's worldview, and we can only imagine what it must have been like as she confronted the persistent scientific racism of her time. She pushed through boundaries at every turn. As a pioneer scholar and practitioner, she was centered. Although a career as a talented musician was available to her, she chose a path that tied academic excellence and social responsibility, one that continues to guide many of us today. She lived by the motto she offered to others, creating her own window on the world, ensuring independence and initiative. Rare indeed, as she chose to open and close that window at will. Many of you are now part of the community, opening new doors and new windows of new knowledge. Home again because of the traumatic experience that had inaugurated her teaching career. I only learned about this experience years later, as most only knew that she was a dedicated sister who returned to Georgia, to Augusta, Georgia, and then Milledgeville, Georgia, following the death of her sister-in-law, and to help her brother finish raising his 5 boys, one of whom was my father. The real story had to be hidden. And every time I think about it, Ellie's story becomes even more important and certainly rare. Who knows what resistance she encountered? As Morrison tells us in Beloved, there are those stories not to pass on. And I suppose this was the case with my aunt, even as she remains my inspiration. In changing our national narrative, however, Jane Ellen McAllister's story is indeed a story to pass on. Thank you. This is a faculty, this is someone at Jackson State. But I am curious that if there were, this was sort of to be a staged photo, that McAllister should well have been in the photograph. But that was not her way. It's not her way. Questions, comments, concerns? Let me know.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we got something to do. Good. Okay, good. So, great.
Okay. Actually, before I was about to get into the Q&A, but I wanted to remind everyone that there's a screening of David Ray Morris's important documentary, My Mind to Me, A Kingdom Is, which encapsulates the spirit of Dr. McAllister's intellectual legacy. Okay, so and that's going to. Yeah,
you gotta go.
I saw a little bit of it. You got to go. It's at the Strand. You got to go. Okay, here are questions.
Thank you.
Take the stage. presenters to get on the stage. And
Oh, you want to
Oh.
start here? Oh, okay. That's a big old book.
Oh, did that.
Oh, we already did that one. Oh, okay, okay. Okay. Okay, so the first question is for Dean Spencer. How much of your educational philosophy is informed by Paolo, goodness, I can't. Freire, yes. Pedagogy of the oppressed.
Sure. I love that question. So I love Freire's work, but to be honest, my inspiration really did come from a lot of the African American educational thinkers. I actually didn't encounter Freire until I was probably working on my master's degree in education, but I had already read many of the other African American sort of educational masters. I read Douglass when I was maybe 13 or 14, so I was already musing and thinking about these issues. I obviously had read Malcolm X, the book, which was really clear. I loved Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, her poetry when I was a young person, and I would memorize her, bury me not in a land of slaves, and so I really was, I was really fortunate. I was really immersed in an a very strong African American church and in a culture. So those were my musings. But I do love Freire's work, and I think he definitely typifies what, the education of the oppressed, needs to be. So I really do embrace his work.
So I think that a lot of times what we find is that people are placing ideas out there, and then they become consolidated into a system of thought later down the road. And what happens is that if you don't know that there is this longer history, you assume that the idea started with this person. And so this notion of predecessor, precursor is really important, and I think that that's where a lot of the difficulty comes in excavating Black intellectual thought, is that those ideas are germinating and being practiced, but they're often in a different environment or in an exclusive environment, and of course nobody is recording that the steps in the fuller development. I took out a large section because I wanted us to have more time, where I talk about Howard Gardner's idea of the different
Multiple intelligences.
Yeah, and I thought, when I'm reading Ellie's ideas, and I'd love to see some of those grant proposals, because she knew how to mince words. And I have learned to do that too, because you want the money. Sorry. Oh, I shouldn't be saying that to a former head of NEH, but anyway, you got to figure out how to say what you need to say to get, what you need. But she was really talking about different learning styles, different processes, and I was thinking, this sounds really familiar to me, but this was not Howard Gardner's era. But this is somebody already thinking about, and then my programs were often inducing people to come together so she could basically look at the different ways people were processing information. So I do think we have to be a lot more diligent in understanding stages of evolution of ideas that then become consolidated theories down the road under someone else's name.
Yeah, but it's also an issue of power, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the idea that something gets named theory, while folks have been engaged in the practice for so long, it's an issue of power, and of course in this country, an issue around race. But I know as a young person, I was putting the pieces together. I was reading about Kwame Nkrumah as a young person, as a 12, 13-year-old, and how he had an education program, and about Malcolm X, and I was putting dots together. Mm-hmm. Of course, that wasn't named, that we have a Black fugitive pedagogy. We're calling it that But as a young person, I knew that in an AME church, that's really what they were trying to do, is help us to see your education as part of your freedom, your destiny. You know?
Yeah.
I think the question is, why is that not much more widely thought that connecting education and freedom?
I'm not in the field, but when you say power, I do think that the power differential, the ability to make information available to larger communities and to have these kind of dialogues between or connecting what somebody has written and has gotten a great deal of attention and is leading a new movement, and what came before that didn't get any attention, that is leading a movement but is not being recognized and acknowledged for what it is. So I think that is a power question.
And I think it's also people don't realize that we all have power.
Yes.
And that's something that so often we think of, we are brought up, like the students I was talking with in the Delta, they're brought up thinking that they don't have power.
Right. Yeah.
It's not something that they have, and we all have it.
Yes.
And that's not, so I think maybe that's the bigger issue, is that everyone's not being taught that they have power and how to use that power. Because we think of power most times as a bad thing, rather than as a positive thing.
Well, I often use, because I'm in literature, as you all know, I often use the example of the College Language Association. So the Modern Language Association was founded at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was exclusive. It was segregated. And so, but there were people teaching literature every place, and there were HBCUs, and there was all this work being done. And so, and this story of the founding of CLA is is a part of the public record now. But at the time it was founded, of course, this was anathema. This is a violation of privacy, because the exclusion of people from the Modern Language Association, complete exclusion, and yet the need for that kind of organization to exist. And so people right down in Memphis, Tennessee, like, we don't need MLA to tell us authoritatively what we should do in our schools. And so an organization was founded, and it still exists. Yes. But those two tiers existed because, and in this case, it was a question of access. Power is one thing, access is another one. And so people said, we don't need to wait for them to invite us in. We know how to do that. And now you see an interesting mix of, in that organization that still meets, and people coming who are working in the field because they know this is where you can get more of that knowledge and exchange. So power, you're right, is one thing, people thinking they're powerless, but the question of access is also, I think, on that agenda.
But is thinking, I think power is, so there's power in naming, in something that gets named. Power does get assigned too. So power is not just about a decision to be powerful. It also is about how one gets seen and how one's power gets noticed, positioned. So I think that, like, the people who were reading by candlelight in the enslaved, I think they knew that there's something powerful about literacy, but did they have power in that system to actually be able to declare that what I'm doing is powerful? No, they actually had to make sure that they're
they have to hide.
Yeah, I think they knew they were incredibly powerful. I think they had no doubt. Because the whole system wouldn't be against them if they were not inherently powerful. But I do think power is not only helping people see that you have power, but helping them also to read and be strategic enough to understand that a woman, and she couldn't just come out and just say, I'm powerful, do it like this. Mm-hmm. She had to read the room, right? Yeah. Enough to know how to maneuver.
I have another question. It's actually for Dr. Eubanks. you noted that you noted that a comment by Dr. McAllister brought you near tears. The comment was, "I just want to vanish." The question is, what was it about Dr. McAllister's comment that moved you, and what, in your judgment, did she mean by her comment?
I think what moved me the most was that she didn't think what she had done was incredibly important. It was just what she felt she had to do. And I guess that's what it is she just thought, this is what I do. It's not world changing, but it was. And I think that's the thing that I think really moved me to tears, is that she didn't recognize her own power. Oh. That's it. She didn't. That's what it is. That she did not recognize her own power.
Well, born in a different era, too.
She was born in a different era. I mean, that's why it is really the 19th century.
Yeah.
So you're finding ways to use that power in subversive ways, rather than coming out and saying you're powerful. I mean, this is before Stokely came out and saying we want black power. It's like, she's not of that generation that can just come out and say, I know what I want and I know what I'm going to get. It's like, I know what I want. I'm not going to say that too loud, but I'm going to work to get that anyway.
That's right. So y'all know I do speculation.
And it's critical.
Yes.
Critical speculation.
And I think because she had an incredible education. She had a classical education. What's the academy in that black middle class people went to here? She went. They talked Latin at home. She had an incredible education. So I think what she saw was, I'm privileged. And this is the argument I have with my kids all the time, like, y'all are privileged. So go and do something other than what you're doing. Because you got more than some people.
Yeah.
Do more. With more, you do more. But I think she recognized opportunities that she was given, especially when she finished the degree, but she was also aware of the times in which she lived. So you may have power, not talk about it as power, because you might get shut down. And so rather than she had an agenda. She was intentional, I think, and aware. And so this image of the little old lady sitting on the front porch and not a danger to anyone is thinking and moving and shaking and having these programs and bringing these people together. And when somebody...
Getting money.
And getting money. And that's hard. Getting money. And so when Jacob Reddix gave her a chance to come back home and care for her mother and say, you don't have to live on campus, it's like, wow, this is something I can do, because she really did. She had that program with 200 kids. She said, we need to experiment with this stuff, and the writing is there. The reports are there. Eric has a lot of that stuff. Jackson State has a lot of it.
That's where I found it. It was in Eric.
I know, they've got it. So there is material out there that suggests to me she was fully aware, but she was also operating in the context of the period in which she lived. And therefore, because I guess I said it because Margaret Walker was the opposite. People would say to her, you can't do that. She would say, watch me. And she would do it and get in trouble. I mean, she'd get chastised even by her best friends. Like, you really should not have done that. But if she thought right was right, and she had power, she should do it, because right will triumph. She's also deeply religious. Right would triumph over wrong. And she believed that. Not that the powers that be can shut you down or isolate you, which is what happened. She got isolated. because she did something that was not, quote, acceptable for those times. So I think Ellie was more measured in the way she presented herself, but doing the work nonetheless.
And to keep from being shut down.
To keep from being shut down. What do you want? You want to have an impact? Or you want them to cut your feet off? I do think that that was part of, I mean, because I read and I see these articles, it's like, wow. Even this careful negotiation between deprivation and that language that we were using, the culturally deprived.
Yeah.
I really love that fine tuning she gave to that. It's not about being culturally, you got a culture, you're not deprived. It's the culture that is depriving, a culture that is depriving you. Not your culture, that other culture is depriving you. But that's a very carefully, spoken analysis. So you talk about the intellectual gifts that she had. I mean, her spicing of language, her ability to decipher and figure out how to frame it. And I'm sure that those articles that she published, when people saw it coming in, it really was powerful stuff for the times, because nobody was doing that kind of stuff. So she was writing with this perspective of Black children, Black learners, the education gap, the learning gap, and yet she framed it in a way that was extraordinarily brilliant. But I think it passed by a lot of people. Because otherwise they wouldn't have put it in those magazines. They're like, if they really knew what she was saying.
They really understood it.
They really knew what she said, like, no, folks, we don't want to do this one.
Beautiful. So these are great questions. We have another question for you, Dr. Spencer. Do you have a think tank at regular sessions where your new ideas are hatched, or are you, as a dean, the generator of the cutting-edge initiatives that you described?
Wow, it's a great question.
Yes, it is.
So there are moments when I'm a think tank of one, I have to say. No, but honestly, these are things that have been germinating for so many years. But I'm also very fortunate because I also have faculty around me who are invited to, we just bounce ideas definitely off one another. Or if they come to me with an idea. So like the prison, the work we do in prisons right now, I had a young faculty member, an assistant professor, come to me. He had gone to every college at our university and asked every single dean if they would sponsor this program. And it would be an initial outlay of funds from their budget, and they had all summarily told him no. He came to me. I had been there about 4 or 5 months, and almost before he could finish his sentence, I was like, yes. I said, this is what we ought to be doing.
Right.
And so, so I said, yeah. I said, yeah to him, and it would take a seed. I'd have to provide a seed of funding from us. And I remember talking to my provost, and she basically told me, you should not do this. This is a no. But, I was like, I'm going to step out. I'm just going to step out on this limb. And I funded it. And about 3 months later, they got a $175,000 grant for that prison initiative, which is just like, and my provost called me and said, you're
I
right.
apologize. That's what I want to hear.
We were kind of in our monthly meeting, and she kind of, a little bit cavalier, was kind of like, you were right on that one, but for me, it's about what, and I ask my faculty this all the time, what is the work that a school of education at an R1 institution, what is our responsibility? What should we be doing in the middle of a community that is underserved, that is minoritized, that is oppressed, all these things? And so I'm constantly putting this out to my faculty, to my staff. What is our work? Because our work is not only just to come and teach a class and go back home, but there is a role that schools of education ought to play in communities that is different perhaps in a school of engineering or a school of business
a school of education ought to be doing something of importance. So yeah, I have folks around me who help me incubate ideas, but I'm kind of like, let's go. Like, okay, let's do it, you know. And so that's kind of how to answer that question.
Yeah, the spirit of Ellie lives. This is for you, Dr. Eubanks. Are you housed in the African American program? Are there any joint research projects in which you may be involved?
I'm actually housed at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi, and I am working on a book on the Mississippi Delta that's going to be published next fall by Beacon Press. But the project that I'm engaged with at the center, in addition to my teaching, is we had a protest at the University of Mississippi in 1970 where 89 black students were arrested during a peaceful protest. 8 of them were expelled, all of them were jailed, half of them at Parchment Farm. So part of my work is to get as many oral histories from those people as I can, and I'm also working on a digital humanities site that will tell the story of that protest, but I'm not really just kind of the events that lead up to 1970, which I contend is kind of the last, a lot of the events of 1970 are the last events of massive resistance.
Yeah.
Because that's when full integration happens in Mississippi. You have Mississippi Valley protests and arrest. You have Ole Miss. You have arrest in Charleston, Mississippi, of high school students who were also put in Parchment, and you have Jackson State. All those things happen in the first 5 months of 1970. But I'm taking this digital humanities site back to the origins of the University of Mississippi and its use of enslaved labor to construct the university.
Yes.
And then we're going through and looking at how some of the ideas that shaped the university are reflected in, for example, our student yearbook. 1915, the year that Birth of a Nation is released. In the yearbook, there is a photograph of a co-ed Klan club. 1925 is the first time that we see the use of the term lost cause. In the yearbook, we begin to see these ideas of Southern honor. We see the use of the Confederate flag become much more prominent after the Dixiecrat Convention in 1948. So connecting all of those dots, going back to the university's origins with slavery, through that time, through 62, up through 1970.
Wow.
So that's the project that I'm involved with.
That's awesome.
Because one of the things I found fascinating about Ruth Simmons is when she went to Brown and made it absolutely clear Brown's involvement in slave trading and everything, and forced them to talk about it. And I was curious how she got away with that. And I was
just talking with her about 2 weeks ago at a meeting up in the Berkshires, and she said, I just felt it was something I had to do. She just...
And they didn't fire her? They did none of that. I don't know.
I mean, she just, after meeting her, I actually, I told my wife, I said, we will never see the likes of a Ruth Simmons again.
I thought the same thing.
Wow.
And that someone who could have that much bravery to do that at that moment when nobody was talking about this.
I agree.
Wow.
And that's, but it's something that I think we have to really talk about, because every day I go to work in a building constructed by enslaved labor. Every day.
Every day. And that's a good lead into this next question. This is to Dr. Joy again. How can we be intentional about teaching our scholars soft skills, emotional intelligence, business skills needed to enter the workforce? And where are current freedom schools happening in Mississippi or in the USA?
Wow, it's a great question. And I do feel like we've sort of lost a lot of that over the years when we were so focused on the content of things, but we oftentimes miss the how and the oil that actually that actually oils the mechanisms. So I'm trying to think how we teach it. So a lot of my work is really there's these levels of it. We're teaching middle schoolers in a summer academy, but then I'm simultaneously training college students and graduate students on how to mentor these students. And then I'm also bringing in teachers, and we use the STEAM Academy as sort of a lab in which to do the work. So there's all these levels, and I really think that the mentoring piece and the care piece comes out in how we train folks to work with our middle school students. There's a lot of working with my older, young adults around, okay, if that one student doesn't get it, what do you do? Like, what's the work that you have to engage in to go after that one if the 99 already get it? So I think there is a lot of attention and detail taken to make sure that there is deep levels of care for every individual student. Part of it is also helping them recognize that if a student gets neglected, what do we lose as a result of that? So I'll give one example. At the end of every day of STEAM Academy, after the kids have gone home, children, myself as the executive director, all of our counselors who we call pod leaders, and any other adult in the room, we come together in a circle. It's every single day after STEAM Academy. And we do a round, and we basically, each person has to check in, but the specificity of the question is, what do we need to do to make sure that every child sees success before the academy is finished? And so there's this hour, so to speak, after a day that's been busy and hectic, where we might spend 30 of those minutes coming up with ways to support that one kid. And there's a lot of care and a lot of concern that gets poured into that moment, and a lot of energy and resources around the one or two students who might be sort of not getting with the program, so to speak. So I think character and those things are taught in really, as much as I'm a person about intention, I think they're taught in really invisible, quiet ways. People see how you are as much as they hear what you say. So I don't know if that answers the question, Barbara, but I think it's really about the how and the deep levels of intention and care that we give to every single kid that's around us. I hope that's a good model to our students on what we mean by being a good teacher.
Okay.
Freedom schools, I guess.
Yeah, when I finished college, I actually came out to Tennessee to Alvin Haley's his farm, and was trained on how to start freedom schools. And then I got shipped back to California, and we had to start a freedom school from scratch in San Francisco and run it for the whole summer. I mean, it was just the craziest thing ever. But not just crazy, but just you're kind of teaching like your pants are on fire. Everything was like every single moment matters, every single day matters, and we basically brought an entire freedom school for that summer. And I think that freedom school movement, I think it still is in operation, where you kind of get trained over the summer and you go and you run freedom schools. They're amazing, amazing places that are in communities all over the country.
It's like how Peace Corps does.
Yeah, absolutely. Peace Corps. Yes, exactly.
I was just given something to add to this question to let you know that ASALA is currently implementing freedom schools throughout their branches. And there's a website, www.asala.org. Okay, I did that right? Okay. Now, this is our last question. This has been amazing. So this question is for Dr. Eubanks. What is the most impressive thing that you remember about Dr. McAllister. Explain.
Well, I never knew her. But I think I knew her through Geraldine Parker. She was a great teacher.
Right.
And I think that what Mrs. Parker did in that first grade classroom, that I remember so much of it, and I know my kids say I have a freakish memory. It probably means I'm really bad. But I think it's that I remember those things, and thinking about it now as, you know, as a professor, it was like, it was transformative. You know, it was those imaginary trips that you're getting to school, and you're imagining, I'm not going to, and I remember she'd say, now don't tell your parents that we're actually going there, we're gonna imagine that we're going there. And kind of the use of the imaginary in a place that's, I mean, I grew up in a town of 900 people. This is in a building that was the original building for the school, which would have been a Rosenwald school building. Thinking about the origins of all of that, it's that in that little place, in that little town, that she was so intent on taking us far beyond it. That's very much the way that Jane McAllister was thinking. So that's really what, so I never knew Jane McAllister, but I was a direct beneficiary of the way that she taught the people that, and that was my first grade teacher. So that's my first encounter with learning.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. It's beautiful. Yes, it's beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr. Spencer, Dr. Graham, Dr. Eubanks. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed this discussion. I love it.
I know. It's. I have to say that at 3:45 there's going to be a riding tour to Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister's house, and there will be other significant Black historic sites in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Right. So that's what's happening. Okay. So thank you so much. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, listen. Oh, I remember all that stuff.
She was my mother's friend.
Yes. Yes. Well, I have been officiated for 6 years. My mother taught in the country. And so, because my aunt had been teaching me all the time, I just was with my mother. I was not 6 years old. And I just got passed along like I was tall. So I looked like I was old. Like, what you doing? How old are you? And I had to look. I was told, don't you need to look? You know you're 16 right now, Dad. You are 16. It was a church trip. Just like that's a lie. We don't lie. We take opportunities. So opportunism is what it is.
Yes, that's what it is. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
It was fun.
Wonderful.
Because you're recording it, this is great. That's one of our students right there.
Yes.
Oh, he's on that. She's on that. I'm going to go to session.
Yes.
I'm gonna grab my computer.
This is your computer. Like, this is not my computer.
All right, that top one. Thank you.
Okay, that's why I got a label on mine. 'Cause they look alike.
Hello.
Now we got to put all computers look alike.
Hello, hello. Is this thing on? Is this on?
I think it's on.
Hello? Hello? Oh, they shut it down?
Oh, they did? No. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, wait.
It's off.
It's off.
Yeah, it's off.
It's off. It's off.
What do you need to announce?
Yeah,
I have a lot of voice. What do you need?
About the ride-by tour.
Okay, at 3:45?
Out here.
And there's a vehicle, there's a bus? Or
There's a bus. Hello, but get their attention first.
Yeah,
All right,
They'll be-
everybody. I have an announcement. I've been pressed into service as an impromptu announcer. The drive-by tour, we will be boarding a vehicle, a bus sort of thing, at 3:45. It's going to be driving past the house and other important sites in Black Vicksburg
And we'll
history.
come back
and
here.
it'll drop you back off here, 5 o'clock.
Well, no later than.
No later than 5 o'clock. That's what the just
So if you need to make a quick run, we're going to leave promptly at 3:45.
3:45.
We're leaving here at 3:45.
Which is 30 minutes. They have time.